Talmud 94a. So yesterday we talked about how the 8 named Chizkiah took down the 8 named Sanhedrin. So the Gemara is going to further comment on some of Sanhedrin's names and then get to Sanhedrin's personality. Now hopefully, if we get far enough in the Gemara, we'll answer the question people often ask: why, 2,000 years after the temple was destroyed, am I still mourning it? There have been worse things in our history since then. At least if we're mourning actual numbers of death, even though the destruction of the temple came with its own huge number of massacres over a period of almost a century, certainly Second Temple. But we don't call it the mourning of the massacres, it's the mourning of the temple. Why should we care so much? So hopefully if you get far enough in the Gemara, we'll get to the answer to that question. So let's go. The law begins with the word klape. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9 lines from the bottom of the page, third word. Rabbi Yochanan says, why was that wicked one, Sanhedrin, merit Lekroisa to be referred to as I'm not pronouncing the right word correctly, Asnapar Rabbi v'Yakira, which means those are actually 3 of the 8 names. Asnapar, Rabbi, and Yakira are 3 of the 8 names. But put together it means the great and noble Asnapar. So why is his name referred to as the great and noble Asnapar? And if I'm not mistaken, Asnapar, Rabbi, Yakira are in one verse. All 3 of those names are in one verse, correct? Yes, so all 3 of those names, right, before mentioned a few different verses, each time referring to Sanhedrin by a different name, concluding, totaling 8. So these 3, the last 3, Asnapar, Rabbi, Yakira, are actually in one verse, and read together would be the great and noble Asnapar. So why is this wicked one referred to as a great and noble Asnapar? So it says Rabbi Yochanan, because he did not speak negatively towards Israel, about Eretz Yisrael. And the word Asnapar has the same root word as siper, which means to relate or to tell. So the great noble speaker is another way of looking at the words Asnapar Rabbi Akira, the great noble speaker, and that he only spoke nobly about Israel and didn't speak disparagingly about Israel. Where do we find this? Shanamar, as the verse reads, this is Sanhedrin speaking to the Jewish people, and he says, Ad boi, until I will arrive, lakachti, I will take you, lakachti esem, I will take you, eretz, to a land, ka'artzchem, same as your land. So it didn't say, I'm taking you to a land that's better than your land, because he wasn't going to say that there's any land that can possibly be greater than Israel. So he said a land like your land. So even though he didn't speak in praise of Israel over other countries, but at least didn't speak disparagingly. Because of that, he got this name, the great and noble Asnapar, the great and noble speaker. Now the Gemara relates the following, and the Gemara makes a similar comment about Achashverosh. It's a very interesting dispute, and gives some insight into the way people view politicians. Rav and Shmuel were discussing this issue of Sanhedrin telling the Jewish people, I'm going to take you to a land that's the same as yours. And Chadamar once says, Melech Pikachaya, he was a very wise king. It was very smart of him to say that. The Chadamar, the other one says, Melech Tipashaya, it was a foolish idea for him to say that. The same thing is said about Achashverosh. If he was a wise king or a foolish king. And it would seem like it's a combination of both. So a very similar thing here also, they're analyzing the same statement by the same person, and one says he's wise, look how smart he is, and the other one says look what an idiot he is. Sound familiar? Can't say that. Sorry?
Bifurcation, polarization of the
No, not to say the T word. I'm just joking, but it's a similar kind of thing. People hearing the same statements, and half the country thinks he's the smartest guy in the world, and half the country thinks he's an idiot. So this goes back to the Gemara's age, back to Sanhedrin. Same statement. Telling the Jews, go to a land that's just as good as yours. Wise idea or foolish idea? So what's the logic either way, to say it was wise or to say it was foolish? following the logic that he was a wise king and saying, I'm taking you to a land that's like yours, was a smart idea. Because Iyaminalu had Sanhedrin told them, Adifa maraychu, I'm going to take you to a country better than yours. Amru, the Jews would respond, Kamashakris, you're lying. So it was very smart of him to say it's a land just like yours. Soften the sugarcoat the pill. It's not going to be so bad. I'll take it to a place just as good as yours. Had he said better than yours, they're going to look at him and say it's not possible. This is the best there is. Now, Manda Amar, according to the view which says Melech Tipesh Haya, that he was a foolish king. So why was it foolish to say take you to a land just like yours? Because they would respond and say, in Cain, if the land there is just as good as ours, my Rabusa, why is it better? Why don't they just stay right here if it's the same? So the same statement has this angle of very smart idea, so that they don't think he's lying, they trust him. And on the other hand, it's a very foolish idea, because what's the point if it's the same as our land? Okay.
Let it stay.
Sorry?
You let it stay.
Yeah, if it's the same, why not stay here? You're convincing us to go somewhere else. It's just as good here. Let's stay here. Okay. This is what I'm saying. The political analytics of looking at one statement and saying smart and silly is not a new thing. It's been going on forever. Okay. So Lehecha Igli, where did they go to? We're talking about the 10 tribes now. This is the 10 tribes, the lost 10 tribes. Where did they go? So there's two answers here, both of which are unclear. And I'll just read to you what Steinsaltz says about it. So Mar Zutra says, La Afriki. They went to a place called Afriki. Rab Chanina says, Lahare Slug, to the mountains of Slug. Where are these places? So, says Rabbi Steinsaltz, Afriki is typically the term for the continent of Africa, particularly the Roman provinces established in the place of Carthage. That place, located on the Mediterranean coast, which means like northern Africa, has roughly the same latitude as Eretz Yisrael and climate similar to the climate of Eretz Yisrael. So that would make sense when he says it's a land just like yours, because it's parallel in latitude. In this context, some explain that Afriki is Phrygia and Asia Minor, which would mean north, but also still somewhere near the equator, or the name of a province in Elam. Okay. The location of the Slug Mountains is unclear. It would perhaps reference to the Caucasus Mountains, which I think is northern Morocco. Isn't that right? The Caucasus Mountains?
That would be like
That was in Russia.
in Russia and Armenia.
Russia.
All the way that far?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are the mountains in the top of?
Asia,
what are the mountains in? Oh, that's the Atlas. Sorry,
Yeah. Atlas.
I'm mixing up the Atlas Mountains.
Atlas Mountains, Morocco.
So-
Is it Caucasus or Caucasus? It's the Caucasus is our
Caucasus.
Caucasus, yeah.
Caucasus.
Yeah, that's
That's like Armenia.
Eastern
In Armenia?
Greater
That's very
Russia.
far out.
Yeah, it's Eastern Europe.
That's very far out.
The edge of the old
This
Russian
is,
Empire.
that's, I think that's Armenia, Turkey,
Exactly.
northern
That's
Turkey.
Wow.
Yeah.
Asia Minor. Would you call that Asia Minor?
Sometimes-
Yeah,
Yeah.
Turkey's
That would be
also Asia Minor.
Not
Yeah,
that far from Israel.
it's
No.
farther north than. Okay, I guess
Not
yeah.
that far, just across the.
It's just north versus west.
It's northeast. You have to cross.
Right, but if you're going, what I mean is, I'm just thinking of it in terms of its latitude. But distance-wise,
northern.
Africa it's farther north latitude-wise. But
Yeah.
Africa is just as far. It just happens to be in the same latitude. That's a
Yeah.
good point. I'm thinking of
Yeah.
his first statement about the equal latitude, and then going north would make a change. But
It would
it's
make
not.
more
It's the
sense
same.
that it would be like where his empire was. Syria was just like Asia Minor because he didn't.
He didn't go that far out west. Not that we know of, at least.
We know, yeah.
So those are the two opinions. Okay. Of where they went. The Gemara continues. Avo Yisrael. So Sanhedrin didn't speak negatively about Israel. I said, I'll take you to a place that's just as good as yours. Avo Yisrael, but the Jewish people who went, I suppose these 10 lost tribes, Sipu Begunus and Shalach Yisrael, they actually did speak negatively about Israel. How so? Kimatu Shush, when they came to a place called Shush, Amri, they said, Shavya Ki Aren, it's the same thing as our place. It's the same thing as our land. And that's why it's called Shush. That's what Marshall explains. Not that it was called Shush, and therefore they called it something. In other words, they came and said, oh, this is the same as our land. And therefore the place called named Shush, because Shush kind of sounds like Shavya, which is similar, spelled similar. So it's interesting that, at least at this point, we'll see soon the Jews speak even more disparagingly about Israel, but at this point, Sanhedrin said the places are the same, and the Jews say the places are the same. But when Sanhedrin says it, it's not disparaging, because he's saying they're the same. Whereas when the Jews say it, it is disparaging, in that the Jews are expected to assume Israel is greater. But further, Kimatu Alman, when they placed to a place, when they arrived at a place called Alman, or they arrived at a place and they named it Alman because Amru, they said Ka'alman. This is the same thing as Alman. Alman means the eternal one. This is a reference to Yerushalayim, to Jerusalem as the capital, called Alman, Beit Alman. The Beit Alman, the eternal home, is also referred to as the Beit HaMikdash, and therefore Yerushalayim is like the host of Alman, host of the eternal one. So they came to a place and they said, oh, this is just like Alman, this is just like Jerusalem. So first they say the same thing as Israel, and now they're saying the same thing as Jerusalem. Kimatu Sheish Trei, when they got to a place called Shush Trei, Amri they said, which means double, right? Shush we said before means equal. Trei means double, so it's double equal. Meaning to say, Al Chad Trein, this place is twice as good as the place as Israel.
Trey means two?
Trei means two.
The tray, too.
Yes. So Chad Trein, it's 1 for 2. Meaning this is double as good. So I'm just suggesting, but I think this is fairly obvious in its reading of the Gemara. Is the Gemara literally talking about external beauty? Hard for me to say that. Objectively speaking, meaning the Jews are expected to say that Eretz Yisrael is the best of all places. Does that mean physically? What happens if they come to the Grand Canyon and there is no Grand Canyon in Israel and it just happens to be more beautiful than anything there is in Israel, aesthetically speaking? So what does it mean that they're expected to say it's the best land? So I would think it's very obvious, and that's why it progresses first Israel, then Yerushalayim, in that the Jews are expected to be spiritually in touch with what the divine presence in Israel, that therefore wherever they go, they should. In other words, the notion that Israel is the same as everything else is only if you're looking at its beauty. If you're looking at its external beauty, then you might say, yeah, it's the same as everywhere else, and maybe there's places that are more beautiful. But a Jew is expected to sense the divinity in every place, and when they leave Eretz Yisrael, they should easily say this is lacking something. I don't know, maybe it's nicer, maybe it has nicer trees, but it's lacking divine presence. Especially since here it's referring to Yerushalayim as Alman, the eternal one, in reference to the eternal one who rests there. This would be obvious to me. And in a way you can say even further. They don't just say, well, let me put it this way. When they say that this place is just like Israel, in terms of its spiritual sense. So there's two ways of thinking about that. One way of thinking about it is they don't sense the spirituality of Israel, and therefore they go somewhere else and they say it's the same. That's one thing. Or you could say the reverse. They've got us so confused that they feel like we can have a spiritual life here too. It's just as fine. We can have a better spiritual life here. So this is a doubled exile, in that not only do you not appreciate, in other words, there's one level of exile where a person's distant from their land, and they say, well, our land isn't that great. Another issue is someone who's distant from their land and feels like there's no need to even go back because here it's just as good. We can rebuild our whole, in other words, they're comfortable in their relationship with Hashem outside, in exile. In the language, some choshech la'or, they turn darkness into light. And it's not only they're in exile, but they don't even realize that it's in exile. Because what's the problem? It's just as good. We have the eternal one here. They call it Alman. We have the eternal one here. We don't have to go back to Israel. We have the eternal connection. We have our exile is fine. We have our connection to God. Everything's fine.
Maybe that's what Sanhedrin was saying. He's saying, you have scholarship in here. You'll have to be at the same thing there.
You'll have your godly connection there too.
In fact, they did.
And they came.
The whole Talmud was developed in Babylonia and whatever. So.
In other words, telling them, you'll have your spiritual survival without this. You don't need it.
Right.
So it's not just that you're in exile, but you think the exile is fine, making the exile even worse. Perhaps.
And also, these people didn't go to Jerusalem because they had their temples
in the north.
In the north. So that's why Jerusalem to them didn't have the same impact as.
That's such a good point. They were in the north. They had the borders that didn't allow them to cross down to Jerusalem. Which might explain why Steinsaltz doesn't say Alman refers to Jerusalem. He says Alman refers to all of Israel. But Rashi clearly says Alman means Yerushalayim, which is why I went with that.
Yeah. So for them, they didn't feel the loss because they didn't have the connection.
Right. That's a good point.
And also that's why they assimilated eventually.
Yeah.
That's exactly
the truth is that their exile started before they technically left Israel. Their exile started the moment the kingdom split, and the northern kingdom went in idolatry. So their technical exile started later when they left the land, but their spiritual state of exile started earlier already. And therefore, I guess when they left, they said, well, what's the difference? It's all the same.
That's
Or maybe
also
it's
why
better
they
here.
didn't come back. The Medrash raises the question: why is it the 2 tribes remain and 10 tribes? Hashem didn't protect them.
Because even when they were there, they didn't have their connection.
Yeah, that connection was lost.
Oy vey.
Yeah. Eventually, it'll come back. But
Yeah.
not a Yom Hazeh. They're lost.
Yeah. There's a fellow who traveled around trying to find them. It's an interesting documentary. Not so convinced he's right,
Yeah.
but it's interesting nonetheless.
The spiritual exile began as soon as the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed.
This is even before the basement is
The 10
destroyed.
tribes even earlier.
The 10 tribes,
They were cut off from Yerushalayim.
the northern kingdom split from the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom started just above Jerusalem and went all the way south. So the southern kingdom, well, different times, there were different rules, but generally speaking, for most of that 300 years or so, or 250 years at least, there was a border that didn't allow people to cross. You weren't allowed. It was one of the miracles that happened on which day was it? The 15th,
Too bad, yeah.
16th of Av, was that they opened the borders between the north and southern kingdom. It was one of the big miracles of the day. So, which means that there's a whole slew of people who never even went to Jerusalem to the temple. They built their own temples for idol worship up in the north. So their spiritual exile started even while this temple was standing.
So that strengthens your question at the beginning of the year. So why are we mourning?
Why am I? Yes, that's correct. Which is
if the
which
exile
hopefully we'll get to
started
here.
before that, yeah.
Yeah.
So were these at the same time, Sanhedrin and King Ezekiel?
Yeah.
Yes, correct.
That's why
They're in battle.
Yeah.
They're
Oh, yeah,
not technically in battle, but God's angel gets rid of them in front of before
Sorry,
Cheskel.
it's a big miracle. Sorry.
That's correct. The night of Pesach.
Sorry.
Okay, so now the pasuk says like this: that in describing the Sanhedrin and his army's demise in their attempt, to battle the Jewish people, the pasuk says as follows: "V'tachas kvoidoi, and under their glory, yikoid ki yikud esh, there blazed a blaze of fire." End quote. Under their glory, there was a blaze of fire. So the blaze of fire that took them out is under their glory. What does that mean? So what's glory? And then you'll see what's under glory. So 2 different opinions. Rabbi Yochanan says, Tachas kvoidoi, under their glory is where the fire consumed them. V'lo kvoidoi mamish, but not their actual glory. Well, what's that? So says the Gemara, Ki had Rabbi Yochanan, like Rabbi Yochanan follows his own view. Kare le'lamani mechabdusai. Rabbi Yochanan would call his clothing his glory. Explain that in a second, but let's just look at the technicality. So when the pasuk says their glory didn't go in fire, but under their glory went in fire, it means literally that their bodies were consumed and their clothing stayed intact. Clothing is their
is burning and intact.
and their clothes stay intact.
That don't burn.
Kvoidoi, that's their clothing. Rabbi Yochanan called his clothing his glory, his kavod. So their glory, their clothing stays intact, and their bodies just consumed. So you wake up, so that's what happened to Sanhedrin's armies. They woke up in the morning, come outside, and they see a bunch of uniforms, empty uniforms, essentially. One view. Rabbi Lezer says, Tachas kvoidei mamish. Under their glory, literally. He says glory means not their clothing, but their physical flesh. So under their flesh would be the souls that are in their bodies. Kesreifas b'nei Aaron, like the way in which the children of Aaron died when they walked into the temple. Malahalan, just like there, when the children of Aaron walked into the temple, Sreifas neshama v'guf kayam, their souls were consumed, but their bodies remained intact. Afkan, likewise here, Sreifas neshama v'guf kayam, their souls were consumed and their bodies remained intact. So that's the literal meaning of the Gemara. What this means, maybe, is glory is a double-edged thing. Glory already implies, glory says 2 things. There is no glory when nobody else is around. Glory implies the way in which a person presents himself to others. His external features, the way in which he interacts with others, which is like clothing. Right? Lavoshim is machshava d'bramaisa, but it's all the way in which a person interacts with others. So, if the person's honest and true person, then his glory, the way in which he presents others, directly matches who he truly is. But if the person's deceptive, then his glory, the way in which he presents himself to others, is different than who he is. And this may be what the Gemara is saying, in that when their glory remains intact, but their bodies are consumed, it's a way of demonstrating that they were false in that sense. Their glory had nothing to do with who they actually were. 2 levels of glory, whether it's more internal or less external, or more external, their clothing or their bodies. But I think it's all to make the same point, that their external presentation sounded all beautiful and all nice, but on the inside it was hollow. Maybe that's kind of what the Gemara means.
I don't know which Gemara, Rabbi, he prayed to them, and after he came with the clothing, when he want to wash, he pull out his sleeves, wash the clothes, he make honor my body, honor only the
I don't know.
Yeah.
Don't know. Okay, so that's perhaps what the Gemara means.
Check it.
Yeah.
Report back on Monday.
Okay. So we're not going to have time to get all the way to the Gemara that answers the question, but we'll answer the question nonetheless about why it is we mourn. So it would perhaps be something like this. It got me thinking earlier this week because I have a friend of mine who's a teacher teaches 15-year-olds, and he was asking on our class group chat, how do I explain to 15-year-olds that they need to mourn the destruction of the temple? Like in their modern American lives where they have iPhones and everything nice and good, why should they mourn?
Is that yeshiva class or is it?
Yeah, yeshiva.
Oh, see, they already know about it.
Yeah, no, they know all the history. They know that Jews died. They understand all that. But like, why should they actually mourn? Meaning, you have to talk to their human side, not to So there's the history of it and all the destruction.
Yeah, like why don't they mourn more recent tragedies that even may have affected members of their family? Like,
Yeah, you were talking to 15-year-olds. Even that's a question. Like, why should I mourn?
even
That?
then,
It happened.
but there may be,
It's not an uncommon
it's
response.
closer still.
It's closer, but it's not an
something
uncommon.
2,000 years ago.
It's not an uncommon response where people say, "I should mourn that." Why don't I mourn the Spanish Inquisition? Just 10 generations ago.
Yeah, but when you're Zaidi or you're,
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's getting less. We're
Yeah.
we're getting farther away.
Yeah.
So, I think anyway. So there's all kinds of suggestions, and this is my suggestion, and this is what I think it is. Something along these lines. I don't know how well it works for 15-year-olds, but it got me thinking, at least in terms of articulating it in a human kind of way. So, all human beings, by nature, this is the way it is, at one level or another, and at some time or another, it's almost like a bug in our system that we're constantly asking ourselves, what in the world am I doing here? The existential questions that everybody asks, what am I doing here? What's the point? Why am I here? These are existential questions that everybody asks themselves. If it's too often, then you might need to seek a professional. I mean that literally. If it's so incessant that you can't live your life, then that's part of what counseling will do. But normal, healthy people have these questions on a normal, regular basis. It's just the way of life. And then I think even 15-year-olds to some degree or another, whether they know how to articulate these things, already start to ask these questions. So the Beit HaMikdash, imagine you have a physical place where you walk in there, and it's not as if you go to the Beit HaMikdash and you get all the questions answered. Oh, which one's your question? You want to know what your objective is in life? Here, do that. Or you want to know what's the point? Here. That's not what happens in the Beit HaMikdash. But the Beit HaMikdash is a place. Right? We use the word Gilulukos, the place of divine presence. What does that mean? Or what effect does it have on the person? The effect it has on the person is where instinctually he knows, oh yes, this is all right. This is all here. This is all the truth. It's not like a logical answer and explanation for why or how or where and getting all the answers to all the... It's a place where things are so obviously true that the questions don't even begin. That's what the Beit HaMikdash is, which I think is expressed in where we say it's called a place of peace. It causes peace in below and peace above. What's the lashon? Mesim shalom b'famaya shamata. Shamaya, I'm mixing this up. Am I getting this wrong?
Makes peace above and below.
Yeah.
Between
heaven and earth.
heaven and earth.
I could be getting the line wrong, but the point I'm making is that it becomes a place. It's a physical space where the truth of everything is obvious. So the incessant nagging is not answered, but doesn't exist, because the truth is there, finished. The lack of such a space is not just metaphorically or by extrapolation, is literally the reason for all suffering, period. A person would never be motivated ever to do harm to anybody else ever if they were always 100% clear on, this is the truth of what I have to do. This is the truth of life. the beginning of the issue is when a person has an unclarity on this. Then all of a sudden, from there comes jealousy. Then from there comes anger. From there comes frustration. From there comes anxiety. From there comes 1,000 different things, which lead to 1,000 different terrible experiences. If a person's in a place of comfortable self-confidence that this is the reality, then there's no reason for any strife, division, hate, anger, none of it. There's just no reason for it. There are no conditions under which this should make any sense, because this is the truth. What am I worried about? What am I worried about? Which also explains why often tzaddikim are referred to as Kodesh, or as the Holy of Holies. Why are tzaddikim referred to as Holy of Holies, or a temple? It's the same reason. Because a tzaddik himself is connected in such a sense where that divine truth is obvious to him, and if he's a real tzaddik, when you're near him and you hear him speak, not because, like my grandfather said, my mother's father, Shaya Charlie, said that when he was shopping around, going to different Hasidic circles, and he came to the Rebbe's Farbrengen for the first time, he didn't understand a lot of what the Rebbe was saying because the Rebbe's accent in Yiddish is a very heavy Russian accent, and my grandfather came from Hungarian background. The Yiddish is very different. So if you're not used to it, it's hard to follow, especially there was complex, deep talks. But what hooked him was he heard the Rebbe say a pasuk. You can follow a pasuk because it's a familiar word, so he heard the verse. It was the first time he felt like there's an actual God saying an actual word of Torah. As in, like, it's not just a vart, he's saying a nice pshat. So what happened in that moment? It's not like a question in his life was answered. But when a person is living in a connection to this is the truth, then everything he says comes out as this is the truth. So it's not as if the questions are answered, but there are no questions because this is the truth. There's nothing else to do. That's why tzaddikim are often referred to, the place of a tzaddik is often referred to as the temple, for that reason. Which also explains why, where now the famous statement that ever since the temple was destroyed, that the place of God is in the 4 cubits of halacha. Why halacha? Not Torah necessarily. It doesn't say Torah. It's halacha. Why? Because halacha is that decisive thing. This is what's true, this is what's not true. When you're studying Torah, well, maybe you got it right, maybe you didn't get it right, maybe you got it wrong, maybe you didn't get it wrong. Whatever. It depends how good you are, depends how well you know, depends how much you learn, depends if, 1,000 different things will make it whether or not you got it right or wrong. But when you're talking about halacha, there's no ambiguity. This is it. And that's the place of the Beit HaMikdash. It's a place of absolute clarity. Clarity of all the things that cloud, all the existential things that clouds a person's mind are clear and obvious in the Beit HaMikdash, and they're clear and obvious in the temple, in halacha, and they're clear and obvious in that tzaddik. That's why all these things are all really one truth. And this, I think, in modern terms, is a way of, like, not just modern terms, but an individualized term. Why you're mourning the temple is because I don't have a place where you can walk to and have all of our existential questions, poof, vanish. We just don't have such a place. And imagine if we did have such a place, how good and happy our lives would be, how good and happy our relationship with others would be, and how good and happy the world would be. If everybody can just walk to a place and say, this is it.
You also look at the point of view of oneness. The nations, when we had the temple, King Solomon's time, the nations were coming.
For this reason?
So we're at one with God.
For this reason. They were all coming because everybody wants that clarity.
And
not just Jews who want that clarity.
Well, that's what we're going to have again. Yeah. Isaiah, I think it's 56,
yeah.
70.
So in this,
so we're going to be at one.
And this obviousness of clarity is, there's stages obviously, and ever since post Shlomo Melech era, it's been in a, it's been in a, saying ever since the end of Shlomo Melech, it's been in a steady, slow, painful decline, unfortunately. But that truth, the kernel of what I'm saying doesn't change, even though there's different permutations and different times in history. It had different ways in which it manifested, and it wasn't as clear and obvious sometimes. And
because the 10 tribes themselves split, they shouldn't have.
I'm saying ever since after Shlomo Melech, it's been a slow, steady, painful decline. But essentially, that's what the Beit HaMikdash objective is.
That's the ideal. Yeah.
That's the ideal of what the Beit HaMikdash is.
15th king.
Yeah, because even the second temple, many Jews unfortunately abandoned. They joined the Greeks.
100%. And didn't have the 10 miracles. Didn't have all these things. But those are all the fact that they didn't have 10 miracles, the fact they didn't have prophecy, is all a is a symptom of the more crucial fact that the revelation of godliness / clarity of life wasn't as obvious. That's making it less.
Sachs addressed this question last week in the Jewish press, but
Yeah.
there's a couple of issues here. One is, what you're saying is that the existential question, I mean, we should be mourning the temple because we won't have the existential question resolved until we have the temple back. So that means it's kind of, in a way, for a 15-year-old, it's like, oh my God. So that means we have to live with this as existential question. It's always going to be weighing on us, like why? We have to wait for this. What if it's not going to be built for another 100 years? My whole life I'm going to have this. I want this resolved. So it's like. And the other thing is, what Rabbi Sachs brings up is, if Hashem is everywhere at all times and fills the world, then we should be able to access that or answer that existential question even in Galus.
Yeah.
So it's a question that a 15-year-old could reasonably ask. Like, well, wait a minute. Hashem is he was revealed more obviously in the Beit HaMikdash, but he's here. He's in this room. He's everywhere. Like he fills the world, right? So
it's all a question of concealment.
Right. So
Right. I guess that's also why
you're telling me it's there, but he's everywhere. So if he's everywhere, then I should be able to have that existential question.
But it's interesting you made that as well. That that everyone once mentioned that when Mashiach comes, all Jews will be in the Holy of Holies. I mean, literally, that all Jews are going to walk into the Holy of Holies. Halachically speaking, it's not allowed. But in this sense, in the Holy of Holies is the place where this obviousness of divine truth is so absolutely clear. Everybody's going to be in that space when Mashiach comes, even when you're sitting here in Canada, which is also similar to the idea of Asad Eretz Yisrael as Bashet B'chol Ha'aratzos, which means Israel will eventually expand over the whole earth. Talking about Israel and divine revelation, physically Israel is going to expand. Obviously, doesn't mean that. It means the state of being, which is Eretz Yisrael, this clarity of God's truth, is obvious everywhere in the whole world. So, in a sense, you're right.
Every shul is a Beit HaMikdash to a certain extent. Is a microcosm of the Beit.
That's correct. A shul is supposed to offer that. Shabbos is also why Shabbos is a state of Mashiach being. Shabbos is supposed to offer this clarity. It's all a question of how obvious it is to us. But yeah, that's true. That's true. All right, have a wonderful day, everybody. And God willing, Shabbos is a celebration, and God willing, we will not have to fast on Sunday.
Amen.
With God's help, we won't have to fast on Sunday. We'll be celebrating with Mashiach.
You prepare special